Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. If you just found me at this video, glad you found me. Welcome. Make sure you check out my playlist. We have covered some ground in this book. It's titled Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. And to my family, friends, and subscribers, welcome back. That last chapter, what a doozy. Who would have thought that 100 years later, scientists were going to confirm that there was a connection, or there is a connection between the endocrine system, which is responsible for what? Reproducing and regulating hormones, and mental disturbance. And any slight imbalance will have adverse health effects. These occultists understood that the whole of the life processes are regulated by the endocrines, and along with physiologists, they knew that this endocrine balance is intimately associated with emotional states. And crazier yet is wondering, well, at least here in the United States, how come certain regulating agencies didn't have experts to know that putting synthetic chemicals in our food was not going to have some adverse health effect on humans? Or maybe they did know it. It just took all these years for us to see how en masse the adverse effects would be, as each generation getting sicker and sicker. How did we let it happen? It's no wonder people are losing trust in their government. The public has discovered it has allowed the food industry to microdose it with EDCs, those endocrine disrupting chemicals. Anyways, as you can tell, I'm still in shock. Like I said, this is a lengthy book and we must forge on. I told you I'd see this through till the end, right to that last chapter. I won't spend too long on this intro today, especially since part 3, the author offers a diagnosis of a psychic attack, and if you pay close attention, as I know some of you will discover the methods employed in making a psychic attack. And also, she talks about the reasons why anyone would be motivated to employ such techniques. They weren't very good ones, like trying to get sex from someone, trying to help them depart from their money. The reasons, unbelievable. But usually, it's sex. Anyway, the author did issue a caution as a matter of observation, I believe, on her part. And she said that when a normal person takes up occultism, he learns for the first time of the existence of the invisible worlds and begins to think about them. Immediately he does this, he comes into touch with them. At first, he may not be able to perceive them consciously. Nevertheless, he is feeling them subconsciously, and they are affecting him. And this is why I will repeat my warning. You see, the idea that consciousness creates reality. So, due to the nature of this content, I am inclined to forewarn you that this topic is very delicate, and if your mind is prone to speedy imaginations and vivid fantasies, I would recommend clicking off. Additionally, the author will discuss the role in which drugs, potions, unguents, and fumigations, aka incense, has played, and their uses, the whole shebang. And she will offer many illustrations of accounts of a psychic attacks, but also reveal descriptions in which the attack was combated. So in that way, a defense description is provided. I know your time is precious and I won't elaborate too much in this intro, but do keep an ear out for terms such as astral journeys, lucid dream, changelings, incubus, and succubus, just to name a few. I would have loved to spend more time on that here in the intro, but I have been dragging the intros a little too long and I don't want to keep you. So, my takeaway from part 3, as the author put it, we little realize the extent to which we give ourselves telepathic suggestion by means of extruded thought forms. We are, in fact, ensphered by our own atmosphere, emanated by ourselves. No doubt, we should be guardians of our thoughts. As we're ready to turn the page, please be kind and let me know you were here by way of a comment or hitting the like button. And guess what? We now continue with the reading of Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. Part 3. The Diagnosis of a Psychic Attack. Chapter 12. Methods employed in making a psychic attack. Anyone who reads the old books on witchcraft, usually compiled by the professional witch finders from the confessions of alleged witches extorted under torture, will find that the phenomena described fall into certain broad categories which are so constant in different ages and different parts of the world that we are left with the impression that there must be some fire behind so much smoke. The state records of witch trials in Scotland, the reports of a priest charged with the task of extirpating witchcraft in northern Italy, the archives of Brittany, the stories of magic in classical literature, and finally, travelers' accounts of the practices of primitive people all over the world, all corroborate each other, agreeing as to the phenomena described, the explanations given by the witches of their methods, and the broad divisions into which the phenomena fall. We must first take into account of the use of drugs, of which the black fraternity in all ages have possessed a remarkable knowledge. Potions, unguents, and fumigations were used extensively, and among all the weird and wonderful ingredients of which they were composed, we now and again find substances which are known to be medically potent. The poppy, which gives sleep and dreams, hemp, which gives visions, datura, which produces loss of memory, blighted grains, which produce abortion, certain insects, which are powerfully aphrodisiac, certain barks, which are effectually an aphrodisiac, and in the New World, the buds of a certain cactus and mash, all these and many others play their part in the witch brews. Paracelsus earned fame by turning some of the traditional magical brews to medicinal purposes. The Borgias earned infamy by employing them as subtle poisons which destroyed the mind without necessarily destroying the body. It is related that the Roman philosopher Lucretius was driven insane by a magical draught given him by his wife in order to restore to her his lost affections. There exist old recipes for witch unguents which contain opium and cantharides. It is not difficult to imagine what manner of dreams would come in the sleep thus induced by C.S. Olivier in his recent book, Analysis of Magic and Witchcraft. Gives it as his opinion that attendance at the Sabbat was often achieved by means of drug-induced dreams. Subtle poisons also undoubtedly play a part in the effectiveness of curses, a favorite method being to make a talisman of brass, copper, or lead and fasten it inconspicuously at the bottom of a drinking vessel or cooking pot. What effect the talisman had is conjectural, but there's no doubt at all about the effect of the steady dissolving of small quantities of lead and verdigris in the food. But while all these things were a part and a considerable part of the witch cult, they cannot, strictly speaking, be considered a psychic method of attack, and we only refer to them in these pages in order that their effects may be excluded from the diagnosis. There are 3 factors in a psychic attack, any or all of which may be employed in a given instance. The first of these is telepathic hypnotic suggestion. The second is the reinforcement of the suggestion by the invocation of a certain invisible agencies. The third is the employment of some physical substance as a point d'appui, point of contact, or magnetic link. The force employed may be used as direct current, transmitted by the mental concentration of the operator, or it may be reserved in a kind of psychic storage battery, which may be either an artificial element or a talisman. In Chapter 2, we have considered in some detail the psychology of suggestion and need not repeat what has already been said, save to remind the reader that the essence of telepathy consists in the sympathetic induction of vibration. Experimental psychologists are already suspecting that emotion is closely akin to electricity. They have proved conclusively that emotional states alter the electrical conductivity of the body. The occultists believe that emotion is a force of an electrical type, and that in the case of the ordinary man, it radiates out from him in all directions, forming a magnetic field. But in the case of the trained occultist, it can be concentrated into a beam and directed. Supposing you are able to concentrate your whole attention upon a single feeling, inhibiting all else, you will have achieved a pure emotional state, unadulterated and undiluted. All the life force coming into your soul will therefore flow in this single subdivision of a single channel, instead of in the many ramifications of the usual 3 channels previously referred to. The concentration will be terrific, but it will only be achieved at a terrific price. It is in order to achieve this terrible concentration that the saints of the West and the yogis of the East practice a torturing asceticism. You must sell all that you possess in order to purchase this pearl of great price, and an echo of the method lingers in the fairy tale tradition that the person who finds the lucky stone can only have one wish. Such a concentration is good for one purpose, and one purpose only. We can concentrate on a healing or on a destruction, but we cannot work at both simultaneously. Neither can we readily change over from one to the other. We cannot combine incompatibles within the limits of a single life. That is to say, if we have concentrated on a work of malediction and death in order to achieve an act of revenge, our rage being satiated, we cannot immediately reverse the spin of the soul and reconcentrate upon works of wisdom and redemption. We may liken the soul moving with the tide of evolution to a wheel spinning clockwise, or diasul, and a soul moving against the tide of evolution to a wheel spinning counterclockwise, or widdershins. The position of the axle can be altered so that the wheel revolves at any angle without the direction of its revolution being effected. But the flywheel has to be stopped before the engine can be reversed, and a big flywheel takes a great deal of stopping. Moreover, in order to reverse the flywheel, we have to stop the engine. The normal movement of the soul is diasul, forward with the current of evolution. We need to think many times before we undertake to reverse that spin, even momentarily, in order to undertake a work of malediction and death. The old saying, "There is the devil to pay," is a true one. Indeed, it is questionable whether there is such a thing as a momentary reversal of spin. Momentum has to be checked and worked up again before reversal of spin can take place. Very great forces can be developed by this subjective concentration of the mind itself, but even greater forces can be rendered available if we apply the mechanical equivalent of gearing. If, in other words, while this tremendous concentration is being held, we pick up the contacts of the corresponding cosmic force. We use the powers of the human mind as a self-starter, and as soon as its lesser driving wheel is flying round merrily, we throw in the clutch of the main engine. There is a brief period of struggle as the little machine forces over the reluctant levers of the great machine. Then the vapor fires and the engine takes up its work. After that, it is only a matter of engaging the gears and driving, if you can. So it is with the ceremonial magic. Let us consider a concrete case of someone who wants to avail himself of a fighting force. He would have a recourse to ceremony of the planet Mars. He would therefore gather together in his temple all that was appropriate to Mars. He would drape his altar with a scarlet cloth. He would himself wear a scarlet robe. All his magical implements would be of iron, and his rod of power would be a naked sword. Upon his altar he would place 5 lights, 5 being the number of Mars. Upon his breast would be the symbol of Mars engraved upon a steel pentagon. On his hand would be a ruby ring. He would burn sulfur and saltpeter in his thurible. Then, according to the work in hand, he would call upon the angelic or demonic aspect of the 5th Sephira, Jabura, the sphere of Mars. He would invoke either the deity name in Jabura, calling upon the god of battles to hear him, or the archdevil of the 5th infernal habitation. Having performed this mighty invocation, he would then offer himself upon the altar as the channel for the manifestation of the force. There are many formulae extant designed to enable a force to be brought through without the necessity of the magician himself being the channel. In my opinion, they are one and all ineffectual, the only possible substitute for the magician himself being a trance medium. It is for this reason that ritual magic so often fails to come off. You cannot make custards without breaking eggs, and if you mean to be a magician, you have got to go the whole hog. When it is a question of bringing through the angelic aspect of a force, the matter is on a clear footing. To be the channel of such a force is a great privilege, and is an initiation in itself. The operator has simply to eliminate from his nature all incompatibles and maintain his concentration without wavering. The worst that can happen is that he should fail to obtain his results. But when it comes to bringing through the demonic aspect of a sphere, the matter is on an entirely different footing. Very few people care to offer themselves for the manifestation of such a force as Asmodeus. I do not believe that there is any reliable device for invoking the devils without being obsessed by them, save the method of Aberlin, which involves 6 months preparation and is only operated after the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel have been attained. The edge of the abyss is well fenced. It is not possible to fire a gun and avoid the recoil. Having invoked and concentrated his force, our sorcerer has next to consider his target. He has to get into astral contact with his victim. In order to do this, he must form a rapport, not quite as easy as might be imagined. First, he has to find his victim and establish a point of contact in his sphere, and then, working from this base, succeed in piercing his aura. An unfocused force is not very much use. A focus has to be achieved. The usual method is to obtain some object which is impregnated with the intended victim's magnetism, a lock of hair, nail paring, or something habitually worn or handled. Such an object is magnetically connected with its owner, and the sorcerer can work up the trail and thus enter the sphere of his victim and establish a rapport. He then proceeds as does any other practitioner of suggestion who has succeeded in getting his victim into the first stages of hypnosis. By means of the magnetic link, he has gamed the psychic ear of his victim, who will hear his suggestions subconsciously. It now remains to be seen whether the thought seeds thus planted will strike root or be cast out from the mind. In any case, the victim is rendered disturbed and uneasy. If a magnetic link cannot be obtained, the practitioner of black magic has to fall back upon other devices. One of the most common is that of substitution. Something is chosen and by means of ceremonial is identified with the intended victim. For instance, a small animal may be baptized with the victim's name and then immolated, usually with torture, the operator meanwhile concentrating upon the personality of the original. The old device of making a wax image and melting it before a fire, or driving nails into a wooden statue, baptized with the name of the victim, are frequently met with in the records of witch trials. The actual driving of the nail has no conceivable effect upon the victim, but it helps the concentration of the operator. The talismanic method in various forms is also employed. A talisman is a symbol representing a certain force, or combination of forces, depicted upon a suitable substance and magnetized by ritual. It can be made from anything which will retain magnetism. Metals, precious stones, or parchment are usually employed. Paper is less effective unless it be enclosed in a metal case. Water and oil can be effectually magnetized, but soon lose their potency. A talisman is made by invoking the requisite force, as already described, and then concentrating it upon the prepared object, which is placed ready upon the altar before the evocation is made. A talisman thus made has next to be brought into the magnetic sphere of the victim. It is related that Lady Burton, anxious to convert her free-thinking husband, the famous Sir Richard Burton, the great explorer, used to get her priest to bless little statues of the saints and put them in the pockets of his clothes. A similar device is used by the workers of black occultism. Magnetized objects are placed in the rooms habitually occupied by the victim, or buried in his path, so that he must pass over them frequently. These talismans of evil not only work by their own power, but also serve the sorcerer as a point of concentration for his meditations. Harmful effects are also produced by objects which have been used in black magic and have become impregnated with the forces they were employed in generating. Odds and ends of magical equipment turn up in some queer places. I was present at an auction in a country town when the 12 signs of the zodiac, neatly painted on a blackboard, came up for sale. Various of my friends have picked up magical treasures, such as altar lamps and incense burners that obviously came out of ritual lodges, but the prize of the collection was a magical rod that was put up to auction along with a bundle of fire irons. Large crystals for scrying are frequently seen in antique shops. All such things need carefully demagnetizing before they are brought into one's psychic sphere. I was taking part at one time in a series of psychic experiments which had been going on very well, when, for no apparent reason, things went wrong, and there was a considerable upheaval. We did not know at the time, but we learned later that the owner of the flat where they were being held had obtained possession of a floor cloth that had been used in ritual magic by an occultist whom only the utmost leniency could call doubtful. The artificial element is really the basis of the efficacy of curses. In this case, no physical substance is employed, but a portion of the akasha is molded into a definite form and held thus by the will of the operator until, as it were, it sets. Into this mold is poured the concentrated energy of the operator. Something of his own self goes into it. This is its soul, and it is like a self-steering torpedo which is set to move in a curve towards a chosen mark. Or the operator, if an expert magician, may deliberately ensoul his thought form with elemental essence, which is the raw, undifferentiated substance of life drawn from one another or another of the elemental kingdoms. It is in order to do this that the curse is invoked in the name of some being. The cursor declares, "I curse you by so-and-so." This is the form of evocation which calls the ensouling essence into the thought form, thus making an artificial elemental which is endowed with an independent life of its own. If we want to know something of the efficacy of curses, we have only to consider the record of the men who were connected with the opening of the famous Tutankhamun tomb. There are many other cases equally well authenticated. One can become exposed to occult unpleasantness either by thwarting or in some other way falling foul of an unscrupulous occultist, or by being oneself involved in a dubious occult fraternity. In the case of a quarrel with an occultist, in addition to the ordinary human motives for an abuse of power, one has to reckon with the fact that an adept who is not of the widest nearly always suffers from the unpleasant psychic disease of hypertrophied ego. He will love power for its own sake and take any defection on the part of an erstwhile follower or any resistance to his imperious will as personal insult or even injury. With a trained mind, an angry thought will do damage, and I have known cases of occultists who, out of pure pique, went into extraordinary lengths of spite. One can only hope that they did not really believe in the efficacy of what they did, and were merely playing to the gallery pour encourager les autres, and ensure loyalty among their supporters. Another thing which is particularly disliked by this type of adept is any attempt on the part of a pupil who has broken with him to make use of what he has been taught. There seems to be no lengths to which a jealous guru will not go in order to smash his cella physically. In one case, which came to my knowledge, a concert singer had had treatment for the improvement of her voice from an adept of sorts. She finally decided that she would spend no more money on this enterprise, and told him so at the visit which she had decided should be the last. He concentrated his gaze upon her and told her that if she broke with him, as soon as she went on the concert platform, she would see his face in the air in front of her, and her throat would close, and she would be unable to utter a sound. and that this horrible experience would occur every time she tried to sing until she returned to him and continued to have treatment. This potent hypnotic suggestion proved effective, and her career was at an end until the spell was broken. The following letter contains a very illuminating experience and is of value not only for its account of a psychic attack, but also for its description of the manner in which the attack was combated. In the winter of 1921-22, I was told from the inner planes, "We see your initiation in the Order of Christ." I did not understand very clearly, and I waited. In June 1922, an Oriental, the head of a great religious order, came to see me. I was living in Switzerland. We will call him Z. I expected great things from him and looked on him as a sort of master. Knowing that he had met Abdul Baha, I thought to please him by putting A.B.'s photo on my walls, but when Z entered my room, I saw at once that he did not quite like it. We conversed for a while and he asked me several questions. Suddenly, he offered me initiation into his order. I was taken aback and did not feel the inner consent. I said I must reflect. Later on, an inspiration came to me, and I said, "Is your order the Order of the Christ?" He answered, "It is." I told him of my experience related above and accepted initiation, but I had the inner conviction that all was not right. I felt no inner response to several incidents during the initiation, and I began to call mentally and earnestly upon the Christ, and kept on doing so until the end of the ceremony. I learned afterwards that he had told one of his disciples that I had accepted initiation, but not the master. I would take too long to relate other less important details, so I go on to our second interview, during which he asked me several times to leave the town where I was and to join him in active work. This time I heard the inner voice clearly. It said, "No." Suddenly he said, "Sit in front of me. I will heal you." I was in very bad health at the time. He fixed his eye on mine with a strong, commanding gaze. Mentally, I called on the Christ, and I felt form all around me a sort of shell. There, he said, "I have healed you." The inner voice said, "No." Well, he went away, and I had a bad time, for I had the feeling that all was not right, though I had no suspicion of evil, nor have I now. I wrote an account of this interview to a friend, and a letter from her crossed mine. She told me that about the time of my interview with Z, of which she was unaware, she was told to join our spiritual teacher in helping me. She withdrew from the outer planes, and then she realized that strong hypnotic forces were playing upon me in waves. Again and again she had to use all her spiritual power to help me withstand them, but finally we stood on a rock, bathed in light and free. My letter gave her the key to it, but she replied, "Take care, Z. We'll try again." He realized that he was baffled. He will try on the inner planes next time. Now comes the great experience. A few weeks later at night, I had a very vivid vision. It seemed, but it was a real experience. I was in the middle of a group of 7 or 8 persons, of whom I saw 2 clearly. On my left was a woman entirely veiled in black, but she made a startlingly clear figure for all that. On the right was Z. He said, "Now I will give her the second, the higher initiation." And he seized my right arm with force. But I disengaged myself, and standing straight and calm, I said, I can hear myself now, "Before this ceremony proceeds, I wish to make a statement. I can allow nothing and no one to come between me and the Christ." There was a howl, a tossing of hands, and everything disappeared. Soon after, I tore up my initiation card, put Z out of my mind, and have had no conscious personal experience of him since. But I had introduced him to a young French musician of high social standing, whom he found much to his taste. We call him F. There is a close friendship between F and me, and at that time he needed some Oriental music for one of his compositions. On the other hand, he might have been extremely useful to Z, towards whom he felt strongly attracted. After my own experience, I began to be much alarmed, but felt that I was not big enough to deal with the situation, so I said nothing to F, but prayed that he might be protected from all evil. Shortly afterwards, F told me in his letters of various astral experiences. In his dreams, he was going through all sorts of disagreeable things, and voices kept asking him, "Ask Z to help you. He will help you." Then he became conscious of my presence and began calling on the Christ. All this in his dream, and everything vanished. This happened more than once. Only when I met him again did I tell him of my own experience. I must add that a friend with psychic power came to see me at this time and said, "This last week at night, I have seen you 3 times. You asked me to help you save a young man who was in danger." What did it mean? The above case indicates clearly the deliberate use of mental power by Z, his pretense of spiritual healing being an obvious attempt at hypnosis. My correspondent says definitely that she has never suspected him of deliberate evil. Rather, was he acting rightly according to his lights? I maintain, however, that any attempt to dominate others or in any way to manipulate their minds without their consent is an unwarrantable intrusion upon their free will and a crime against the integrity of the soul. How can we judge the intimate spiritual needs of another, especially if that other has not elected to confide in us? What right have we to invade his spiritual privacy and thrust our tampering fingers into the wheels of his innermost being? It is so common a practice to send the names of people to healing circles with a request that they should be concentrated upon, without taking the preliminary precaution of asking their permission, that I have heard it announced from the platform of a large spiritualist public meeting that only those cases could be taken up which gave their written consent. Fortunately for all concerned, the proceedings at such healing circles are usually so futile that nobody need mind being concentrated upon by them if they were attempting murder. The principle, however, remains, and I can only record my opinion once more, as I have already recorded it many times, that such a proceeding is an outrageous breach of good manners and good faith, and contrary to all occult tradition. I think I can honestly say that I have never wished to direct the great currents of destruction upon my fellow occultists, but there are some of them I would like to get face downwards across my knee. End of chapter. Chapter 13. The Motives of Psychic Attack. 1. We have noted in a previous chapter that the simplest way to find out whether the victim of an alleged psychic attack is romantic or not is to seek for motives, and if they are not discernible, to give imagination the benefit of the doubt. The commonplace motives of greed, lust, revenge, and fear of betrayal do not need psychic discernment for their discovery, but are perceptible to the naked eye. There are other motives, however, that may be operative in occult circles, but which would be passed by unsuspected by the ordinary investigator. The old charm books that have come down to us, mostly via the servants' hall, are replete with recipes for securing the love of the opposite sex. The ancient grimoires supply more elaborate rituals prescriptions, and the reports of witch trials contain frequent indictments of the wise women who, for a consideration, undertook to direct people's affections towards persons for whom they apparently had no natural predilection. Are such operations to be taken seriously, or should we class them with the anti-fat pills that reduce without dieting? We have already referred to the old love philters. The ancients were well acquainted with the aphrodisiac drugs which excited sexual passion, nor are the modern altogether ignorant of them, as carefully worded advertisements in certain occult publications reveal. There are firms in France which specialize in the manufacture of chocolates which contain mass doses of these drugs. Publicity was given to their productions recently owing to the death of 2 girls and a man through taking overdoses. There are cocktails in use in this country containing so-called tonic ingredients whose effect is well known. If these are not love philters, what are they? We are not concerned in these pages with methods that belong solely to the physical plane, but these matters call for mention because there are grounds for belief that upon more than one occasion, even in this country, aphrodisiacs have been employed as adjuvant to occult practices. There was a certain firm which began to advertise extensively and was building up a nice business in what might be called occultist sundries. Among other preparations which they supplied was incense for the operation of Venus. However, the firm came to an untimely end through the intervention of the police, both partners going to jail. But apart from the use of purely material means, it is not difficult to see what uses could be made of mental influence in this direction. I have seen several cases that looked extremely suspicious, but in these matters it is very difficult to get at the facts. The manner of attack is intangible and leaves no trace, and the victim may be unsuspicious and entirely ignorant not only of the psychic side of sex, but also of its physical and subtler emotional aspects. Moreover, those who have suffered most usually talk least. One may occasionally hear of the attempt which was frustrated. The attempt which was successful very rarely comes to light because the victim has just as much motive for concealing it as the aggressor. When we come to purely occult practices, there are two ways in which the desired end can be achieved. Psychic pressure may be brought to bear upon the desired person so that he or she shall come under the influence of the operator, or the psychic operation known as the congressus subtilis may take place. What exactly is congressus subtilis? We shall have to know a good deal more than we do at present about occult side of sex before we can answer that question. In the first place, what are the facts or alleged facts of the matter? The ancients held very definite beliefs upon the subject, and these beliefs can very often afford us a clue, even if we do not accept the very anthropomorphic explanations by which they are accompanied. It was believed that the archdemon Lilith had a very great deal to do with these matters. According to the Kabbalists, Lilith was the wife of Adam, who used to visit him in his dreams while he was yet alone in the Garden of Eden. And the Lord God became so perturbed at these going-ons that he created Eve as a counter-attraction. Witches were the recipients of similar attentions from the devil. Saint Teresa of Avila records that the Godhead itself visited her. The Virgin Mary received the Holy Ghost. Saint Anthony was tempted by apparitions of beautiful female demons. There are many cases on record of whole nunneries being attacked by the devil, who visited their members. George Moore, in his exceedingly interesting study of convent life, Sister Teresa gives an account of an outbreak of counterparts among the younger nuns, in which they formed liaisons with angelic lovers, who were supposed to be the souls of those who were drowned in the flood. We read in Genesis and in the book of Enoch that the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, and the demonic race was the result. The folklore of every country contains instances of the mating of humans with elementals, usually with disastrous consequences. Classical literature is full of stories of the visits of gods and goddesses to humankind. What shall we say of all such stories? Is there any element in them beyond fairy tale and wish fulfillment? We can readily understand the motive of the nun who, wishing to conceal the identity of her paramour, declares herself to be with child by the devil. We can equally understand the psychology of the rest of the convent that make up the story and see the devil in every corner. Let me cite certain cases which have come within my personal knowledge and see whether, in the light of these, we can sift fact from fantasy. There came to visit me once a young man who was in love with a married woman. He told me that upon several occasions he had a very vivid dream of visiting her, and she had simultaneously dreamed of receiving his visit. He was anxious to perfect the technique of this operation, hence the visit to me. I am afraid I was unsympathetic. Consequently, I did not obtain any further information concerning this curious experiment. An even more curious case came to my knowledge some years ago. A woman told me that in the days of her youth she had been engaged to marry a man to whom she was very deeply attached and who was murdered while working as a missionary in West Africa. Having lost the only man she felt she could love, she consented to marry a second cousin who had long been in love with her and who was a semi-invalid. Whenever she had relations with her husband, she always visualized the form of her first lover. She herself was short, dark, and petite. Her husband, a blood relation, was similar in type to herself and a weed into the bargain. But her 3 sons were tall, upstanding, blond men of the Nordic type, bearing a strong resemblance to the dead man. The truth of this story was vouched for me by a friend of the family. I have now personally 2 alleged changelings. The male had the pointed ears of Pan, and if anyone was ever a son of the devil, he was. The female was a curious and fascinating creature, essentially non-human, and when her child was born, it came into the world with no more trouble than a kitten. Both these beings were conceived when their mothers were under the influence of drink, and both of them were characterized by a marked callousness, which in one case developed into deliberate cruelty. Although very peculiar to look at, neither of them was in the least defective, both being in fact possessed of considerable more than average share of brains. Anyone who has any knowledge of this esoteric aspect of sex knows that union is as much etheric as physical. It is this fact which continues the real difference between normal union and self-abuse, and explains why the former is vitalizing and harmonizing, and the latter is exhausting and nerve-wracking. May we not conceive it possible for anyone who can project the etheric body, or a being whose densest vehicle is etheric, to play a part in unions under certain conditions? And if we accept the theory of mediumship, or of obsession, which is a pathological form of mediumship, what shall we say concerning the possibility of a union while one or other of the partners is under control? What maimer of soul might come through into incarnation under such conditions? Medieval tradition recognized two classes of demons which invade sleep and called them incubi and succubi. These were held to be responsible for lascivious dreams. Modern psychology discounts their services and looks nearer home. The psychic, however, is of the opinion that there is something in the old belief, and that the lustful imaginings of men's hearts, and women's too for that matter, do indeed produce artificial elementals according to the method described in a previous chapter, and that these elementals are something more than subjective images, and have an objective etheric existence and play their part in the genesis of certain experiences. For instance, a person may have dreams and fantasies of a lascivious nature, and these may give rise to their characteristic thought forms. These thought forms, now existing independently of the mind that originally conceived them, and being in the aura of that person, give him suggestion just as any other thought forms projected telepathically from the mind of another person might do. We little realize the extent to which we give ourselves telepathic suggestions by means of extruded thought forms. We are, in fact, ensphered by our own atmospheres, emanated by ourselves. I remember being told, as a child, that if a bird cage were hung immediately under the canopy of an old-fashioned four-poster bed, the bird would be found dead in the morning, poisoned by the carbonic acid exhaled by the sleeper lying below. We little realize the extent to which we are physically poisoned by our own emanations of unguarded and unpurified thoughts. It is well known that orgasms take place in dreams, accompanied by appropriate dream pictures. The ancients believed that such an experience was due to the action of demons. Moderns believe it to be due to physical tension. It is not so generally known that there are people, both male and female, who can produce the same reaction at will solely by means of daydreams. May we not ask ourselves whether it cannot also be produced by means of telepathic suggestion, and whether this may not have played a part in the operations of many covens? There's another curious phase of this aspect of the left-hand path, which was brought to my knowledge through a case which came into my hands. A young girl, simple-minded and unsophisticated, living a very isolated life with a widowed mother, went to consult a well-known psychic, whom we call Mr. X. In the circle in which both Miss Y and Mr. X moved, there was another and prominent figure, whom we will call Mr. Z, who had a reputation for a knowledge of magic. Mr. X told Miss Y that he had read the records of her past lives, and that there was a karmic tie between herself and Mr. Z, and that she could help him in his work by pouring out upon him her love and magnetism. She was instructed to meditate upon Mr. Z every night as she lay in bed until she fell asleep. This poor girl, lonely and unsuspicious, gave herself up unreservedly to this task. Presently, however, she began to grow uneasy. Her common sense asserted itself, for she found the meditations she was required to perform were having a very disturbing effect upon her. But Mr. X allayed her fears and recalled her to her allegiance by assuring her that he had looked into the future and seen that eventually Mr. Z would marry her. By now she had upon her hands a heartbreaking love affair, which was making her very unhappy and unfitting her for work. A number of letters upon the subject were exchanged between Miss Y and Mr. X, which I have seen. I did my best to persuade her to drop the whole affair. Mr. X succeeded in persuading her to go on with it, playing upon her feelings and telling her how terrible would be the plight of Mr. Z if she withdrew her psychic support, and renewing his assurance of a karmic tie which would result in an ultimate marriage if she were faithful. Miss Y, pitifully distressed and bewildered, betook herself to certain of the leaders of the organization to which all three of them belonged. These people seconded my advice that she should discontinue these practices, but persuaded her to surrender the very compromising letters which were in her possession. Having secured these, they declared that the whole transaction was imagination on her part, and instead of turning this choice pair of scoundrels out of their ranks, let them continue to function as usual. This would be a strange enough case if it were an isolated one, but it is not. Another woman came to me about this time in a state bordering on insanity and told me that she too had been consulting Mr. X, who had told her that she had already received initiation on the inner planes, though she might not be conscious of it, and that her psychic faculties were on the point of opening, a stock remark of his, but if she wanted to make real progress on the path, she must cease to live with her husband, and he, Mr. X, would put her in touch with her astral soulmate. The consequence of this precious advice was to break up her home and send her out of her mind. One day, walking in the park, she met Mr. Z and declared him to be her astral lover, a statement which Mr. X confirmed and embellished with the information that Mr. Z was also the master who would initiate her. I tried to persuade her to bring the whole transaction to a summary conclusion and return to her husband, but she replied that she could never do this after the astral experiences she had had. Mr. X reestablished his influence over her. She left the address at which I had known her, and I have never heard what became of her. Her condition when I last saw her was deplorable, emaciated, wild-eyed, and twitching with convulsive movements. Would anyone believe this story of such a woman? Obviously no one, unless they had seen the letters that I had seen. Nor is this the only case. A fellow worker of mine told me of two precisely similar ones which had come to her knowledge in connection with Mr. X. It is cases such as these which make the honest investigator of occult phenomena thankful that there is upon our statute book a law which enables magistrates to deal effectually with occultists who prostitute their powers. It is so generally known that no initiate may use the occult arts for gain, that it is difficult to sympathize with people who pay some advertising occultist his half-crown or half-guinea and then find themselves let in for unpleasantness. What conclusions may we draw from the incidents that I have related, for the facts of which I can vouch from personal knowledge? 4 women are persuaded to embark upon a meditation process whose aim is to pour out force. The nature of the force that is to be poured out is indicated by the fact that the married women are instructed not to live with their husbands, and the unmarried girl is encouraged to fall in love with the man who is made the focus of the operation. This man is the head of a group of people known to be occupied with practical occultism and ceremonial. The conclusion I draw is that an occult experiment was afoot, and that, regardless of the consequences to them, these women were being made use of in order to carry it out, the procurer being the well-known psychic Mr. X and the operator the notorious Mr. Z. The same group have to their credit a recurring series of scandals in connection with unnatural vice. If this were merely vice, as such it would not come within the purview of these pages, but it appears to be used systematically as a means of obtaining occult power. Those who have any knowledge of the deeper aspects of occultism know that sex force is one of the manifestations of Kundalini, the serpent fire that, according to tantric philosophy, lies coiled at the base of the spine, or in the terms of Western occultism, the sacral plexus. The control and concentration of the Kundalini force is an important part of the technique of practical occultism. There is a right way of directing it through the thought control, the technique of which I have explained in my little book, The Problem of Purity. But there is also another method, which consists in stimulating this force and then directing it into abnormal channels where it will not be absorbed, but remain available for magical purposes. It is for this reason that in certain forms of the Black Mass, the altar is the naked body of a woman who may either be still living or may be slain sacrificially. A.E.W. Mason gives an account of such a transaction in his book, The Prisoner in the Opal. Less expert operators, however, cannot control this form of force. As soon as they generate it, it has to go to its logical conclusion. They therefore employ another type of stimulus, not the woman, but the boy or youth. The practice of pederasty in connection with occultism is very old and was one of the causes of the degeneration of the Greek mysteries. I have dealt with these subjects in some detail in another book of mine, Sane Occultism. Particulars of the actual cases can be found by reference to the Files of Truth, the journal already referred to. End of chapter. Chapter 14. The Motives of Psychic Attack. Second part. It is a matter of general knowledge among occultists that it is not a pleasant thing to fall foul of an occult fraternity of which one has been made a member by means of ceremonial initiation and to which one is bound by oaths. As we have already seen, the malignant mind of a trained occultist is a nasty weapon. How much more so the group mind formed out of a number of trained minds, especially if concentrated by means of ritual. But in addition to the individual mental force of the members of a fraternity, and in addition to the collective force of its group mind, there is another factor to be reckoned with when a genuine occult organization is concerned in operations of either protection or destruction. Every occult organization depends for its power to initiate upon what are called its contacts. That is to say, upon one or more of its leaders being psychically in touch with certain forces. If, in addition to this, the organization has a long line of tradition behind it, a very potent collection of thought forms will be built up in atmosphere. Every initiation ceremony contains in some form or other the oath of the mysteries, which binds the candidate neither to reveal the secrets of the mysteries nor to abuse the knowledge they bestow. This oath always contains a penalty clause and an invocation wherein the candidate submits himself to a penalty in the event of a breach of faith and calls upon some being to exact the penalty. Some of these oaths are most formidable affairs, and they are administered with every circumstance of solemnity that stage management can devise. The way in which the occult fraternities have succeeded in preserving their secrets shows how seldom these oaths are broken. In the event of a dispute with an occult fraternity, the force invoked in this oath may come into action automatically. If the recalcitrant brother is in the spirit of the tradition and it is his chiefs who are at fault, the power invoked in the oath will be a potent protective influence with which the chiefs themselves will collide. If, on the other hand, he breaks faith with the mysteries, this avenging punitive current will come into action, although his defection may pass undiscovered. I was informed by an eyewitness of an incident which took place at an initiation in which the candidate, a man to all appearances normal in every way, after taking the oath in the usual manner, suddenly screamed most terribly, startling everyone, and was ill for some weeks as if from a severe nervous shock, and never had anything more to do with the occultism. No explanation of the incident was ever forthcoming. I was present myself upon one occasion when a batch of 3 candidates was being done, and it was suddenly noticed in the course of the ceremony that the number of the candidates had become reduced to 2. Enquiry enlisted the fact that the 3rd had taken fright and fled. What happened in these 2 cases, I do not know. Whether there had been a breach of good faith or whether one was intended, no one can say. But something put the fear of the Lord into these 2 individuals pretty effectually, That no such shock is inherent in the ceremony is proved by the fact that these are the only 2 cases in my experience, and I have seen a very large number of ceremonies. Personally, when I took my own initiation, I felt as if I had come into harbor after a stormy voyage. Another man who was intimately known to me as an advanced occultist was turned out of the order to which he belonged. Why, I do not know, but from what I saw of him, I should imagine there were plenty of reasons. In defiance of his initiation oath, he began to work an independent lodge. He was warned to desist, and did so, dismantling his temple. But he immediately began to get together another temple in a carefully concealed place. And this time he was more ambitious, for he made ready to attempt the greater mysteries. He was an exceedingly clever craftsman, and made all the equipment of the temple with his own hands, so that no one should know what was afoot. Concealed behind Nottingham lace curtains in a mean street in West London was a beautiful little temple of the greater mysteries. He completed this work after some months of arduous toil, no one knowing of it save those in his immediate confidence. But before commencing the actual ritual work, he went away for a short holiday at the seaside, and there he was seized with a heart attack while sitting on the beach and died in 4 hours. The order's secrets were not betrayed. Another man who had had a dispute with the same famous order printed and published their secrets as an act of revenge. He was a man of good social position, considerable wealth, and brilliant literary abilities, already making name for himself as a writer. From that moment, he began to go downhill, and came to poverty and disgrace. The curse of Ahasuerus seemed to be upon him, and he was hounded from country to country, finding no abiding place. No publisher will handle his books, no paper will review them. Let me finally tell of my own experiences in an astral skirmish. I wrote a series of articles on the abuses prevalent in occult fraternities, and these were published in the Occult Review. My writings is largely inspirational, a great deal coming through of which I have no previous knowledge, and in this particular case I evidently shot a great deal better than I knew, and got myself into serious trouble. My first intimation of it was a sense of uneasiness and restlessness. Next came a feeling as if the barriers between the seen and the unseen were full of rifts, and I kept on getting glimpses of the astral mingling with my waking consciousness. This, for me, is unaccustomed, for I am not naturally psychic, and in the technique in which I was trained, we are taught to keep the different levels of consciousness strictly separate and to use a specific method for opening and closing the gates. Consequently, one seldom gets spontaneous psychism. One's vision resembles the use of a microscope in which one examines prepared material. The general sense of vague uneasiness gradually matured into a definite sense of menace and antagonism, and presently I began to see demon faces in flashes, resembling those picture images which psychologists call by the unpleasant name of hypnagogics, flashes of dream which appear upon the threshold of sleep. I was quite unsuspicious of any particular individual, though I realized that my articles had probably stirred somebody up pretty thoroughly. What was my surprise, then, to receive from a person whom I looked upon as a friend, and for whom I had the greatest respect, a letter which left me in no doubt whatever as to the source of the attack, and what I might expect if any more articles were published. I can honestly say that, until I received this letter, I had not the slightest suspicion that this person was implicated in the scandals I was attacking. I was in a somewhat difficult position. I had fired off a charge of shrapnel on general principles, and had apparently bagged a number of my friends and associates, and fluttered the dovecote generally. My position was rather complicated by the fact that I did not know nearly as much as they apparently suspected me of doing. I had, of course, known that these abuses existed sporadically about the cult field, as everybody in the movement knows, but to know in this vague way is one thing, and to put one's finger on specific cases is another. I had evidently blundered into something much more considerable than I had bargained for. I feel like the small boy who, fishing for minnows, has hooked a pike. I had to decide whether I would try and get my articles back from the Occult Review or whether I would let them run their natural course and take the consequences. I had had a very strong impulse to write those articles, and now I began to see why I had had it. I shall have something to say in another chapter concerning the Watchers, that curious section of the occult hierarchy which is concerned with the welfare of nations. A certain section of their work is apparently concerned with the policing of the astral plane. Very little is actually known about them. One comes across their work sporadically and pieces the bits together. I have crossed their trail on several occasions, as I will tell you later. Whenever black magic is afoot, they set to work to put a spoke in its wheels. Be that as it may, I came to the conclusion that, in view of what had now transpired, the impulse I had to take and hand this piece of work might have emanated from the Watchers. At any rate, the work obviously needed doing. Someone had to tackle these plague spots if they were to be cleared up, so I determined to stick to my guns and see the matter through, and so left the articles in question to run their course. Very soon, some curious things began to happen. We became most desperately afflicted with black cats. They were not hallucinatory cats, for our neighbors shared in the affliction, and we exchanged commiserations with the caretaker next door, who was engaged in pushing bunches of black cats off doorstep and windowsill with a broom, and declared he had never in his life seen so many, or such dreadful specimens. The whole house was filled with the horrible stench of the brutes. 2 members of our community at that time went out to business every day, and their offices in different parts of London they found the same penetrating reek of the tomcat. At first we attributed this persecution to natural causes and concluded that we were near neighbors to some fascinating feline female, but incidents succeeded each other which made us feel that things were not quite in the ordinary course of nature. We were getting near to the vernal equinox, which is always a difficult time for occultists. There was a sense of strain and tension in the atmosphere, and we were all feeling decidedly uncomfortable. Coming upstairs after breakfast one morning, I suddenly saw, coming down the stairs towards me, a gigantic tabby cat, twice the size of a tiger. It appeared absolutely solid and tangible. I stared at it petrified for a second, and then it vanished. I instantly realized that it was a simulacrum, or thought form, that was being projected by someone with occult powers. Not that the realization was any too comforting, but it was better than an actual tiger. Feeling decidedly uncomfortable, I asked one of my household to join me, and as we sat in my room meditating, we heard the cry of a cat from without. It was answered by another, and another. We looked out the window, and the street as far as we could see was dotted with black cats, and they were wailing and howling in broad daylight, as they do on the roofs at night. I rose up, gathered together my paraphernalia, and did an exorcism then and there. At the end we looked out of the window again. There was not a cat in sight, and we never saw them again. The visitation was at an end. Only our normal population of local mousers remained to us. The vernal equinox was now upon us. I must explain that this is the most important season of the year for occultists. Great power tides are flowing on the inner planes, and these are very difficult to handle. If there is going to be astral trouble, it usually blows up for storm at this season. There are also certain meetings which take place on the astral plane, and many occultists attend them out of the body. In order to do this, one has to throw oneself into a trance, and then the mind is free to travel. It is usual to get someone who understands these methods of work to watch beside the body while it is vacated to see that it comes to no harm. In the ordinary way, when an occult attack is afoot, one clings to waking consciousness at all costs, sleeping by day and keeping awake and meditating while the sun is below the horizon. As ill luck would have it, however, I was obliged to make one of these astral journeys at this season. My attacker knew this as well as I did. I therefore made my preparations with all the precautions I could think of, gathered together a carefully chosen group to form the watch circle, and sealed up the place of operation with the usual ceremonial. I had not much faith in this operation under the circumstances, for my attacker was of much higher grade than I was, and could come through any seals I might set. However, it afforded protection against minor unpleasantness. The method of making these astral journeys is highly technical, and I cannot enter upon it here. In the language of psychology, it is auto-hypnosis by means of a symbol. The symbol acts as a door to the unseen. According to the symbol chosen will be the section of the unseen to which access is obtained. The trained initiate, therefore, does not wander on the astral like any uneasy ghost, but comes and goes by well-known corridors. My enemy's task was therefore not a difficult one, for she knew about the time I must make this journey and the symbol I must use in order to get out of the body. I was therefore prepared for opposition, though I did not know what form it would take. These astral journeys are really lucid dreams in which one retains all one's faculties of choice, willpower, and judgment. Mine always begin with a curtain of the symbolic color through whose folds I pass. No sooner was I through the curtain on this occasion than I saw my enemy waiting for me, or, if another terminology is preferred, I began to dream about her. She appeared to me in the full robes of her grade, which were very magnificent, and barred my entry, telling me that by virtue of her authority, she forbade me to make use of these astral pathways. I replied that I did not admit her right to close the astral paths to me because she was personally offended, and that I appealed to the inner chiefs, to whom both she and I were responsible. Then ensued a battle of wills in which I experienced the sensation of being whirled through the air and falling from a great height, and found myself back in my body. But my body was not where I had left it, but in a heap in the far corner of the room, which looked as if it had been bombed. By means of the well-known phenomena of repercussion of the astral struggle, had apparently communicated itself to the body, which had somersaulted round the room while an agitated group had rescued the furniture from its path. I was somewhat shaken by this experience, which had not been a pleasant one. I recognized that I had the worst of it and had been effectually ejected from the astral paths. But I also realized that if I accepted this defeat, my occult career was at an end. Just as a child who has been thrown by his pony must immediately get up and remount if he is ever to ride again, so I knew that at all costs I must make that astral journey if I were to retain my powers. So I told my group to pull themselves together and reform the circle because we must make another attempt. I invoked the inner chiefs and went out once more. This time there was a short, sharp struggle, and I was through. I had the vision of the inner chiefs and returned. The fight was over. I have never had any trouble since. But when I took off my clothes in order to go to bed, my back felt very sore, and taking a hand glass I examined it in the mirror and found that from neck to waist I was scored with scratches, as if I had been clawed by a gigantic cat. I told this story to some friends of mine, experienced occultists, who at one time had been closely associated with the person with whom I had had this trouble, and they told me that she was well known for these astral attacks, and that a friend of theirs, after a quarrel with her, had had an exactly similar experience, and she too had been covered with claw marks. In her case, however, she had been ill for 6 months and had never touched occultism again. There is a curious epilogue to the story, which may or may not have any bearing upon it. I have already told the story of the mysterious death that took place on Iona, how the body of this unfortunate girl was found lying naked on a cross cut out of the turf. No cause of death could be found, and the verdict was that she died of exposure. But if she were lost, how did she come to lie down to die in this ritual manner instead of wandering about? Why had she taken off all her clothes before leaving her house, covering herself only with a black cloak? And why did she take with her the large knife with which she cut the cross in the turf? I do not know her later history, for I had lost sight of her during the last 2 or 3 years of her life, but at the time I knew her, she was associated with the woman I have referred to. The only marks found upon her dead body were scratches. End of chapter. Alright, if you haven't done so, please do hit the like button, leave a comment, let me know you were here, subscribe to the channel, and let's head over to the next video as we continue With this book titled Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune, she's going to talk about the physical aspect of psychic attack and defenses.